Hi, this is Emma. I'm the team lead, and today we're presenting our computer science capstone project for winter to spring of 2024. And this is the ePrism project sponsored by Edward Ivory.
This is Taylor talking about the ePrism overview here. Of course, ePrism is our project, and it basically takes place with the EPL lab with Ed as our advisor. The whole point of ePrism is to use RFID card readers to take in students' IDs and check them into the EPL lab. Ed here basically wanted us to be able to take this and move it onto a cloud server, which was the overall project we had for this, as well as make sure it works with management staff and the administrator interface, fix some bugs and things like that.
This is Emma, and I'm going to be walking you through the demo for our feature highlights.
The first thing that we changed is instead of searching by badge number to log in, it's now either PSU ID or PSU email. Another change is the waiver is now integrated as part of the signing in as a new student, instead of being posted on the Google Forms. And then we also just fixed like the general window sizing issues with that. Basically anywhere that it was badge ID before, Ed told us that he wanted either ID or email since your badge number changes if you get a new ID. So that's been changed. You can select multiple things to train on instead of just one thing at a time. And then also you can choose multiple users to train at a time. So recent users now only displays the current day and in the order of most recent check-in to backwards. So if you do manage equipment, you can remove machines now and then add them this way. And same thing with categories. And you can edit them as well. Just change the name.
And now Trae is going to talk about the server implementation briefly and give a small demo.
We'll have the Google Cloud deployment, which is a branch which is going to have everything that's been done up until now to get it deployed on a Google Cloud server. Then started on the process of making it work via serverless implementation from Cloud Run on Google Cloud Platform. It has a lot of the implementation that is running right now on the in-person one. It can do a lot of the stuff that we need it to do as far as connects to our database as well. So it does a lot of this stuff.
This is Emma, and next Taylor is going to talk about what our project is and why it is important.
Effectively, what Ed needed us to do was take the card reader, which was already working in the existing EPL lab on a local server, and he wanted us to move it onto a cloud server. In this case, we used the GCP Cloud Run. On top of that, there was a number of like UI improvements, bug fixes, some added features, which we'll sort of get into throughout the rest of this presentation.
Hi, my name is Tyler. I'll briefly be covering our stakeholders for this project. At the moment, it's pretty limited, only consisting of students accessing the EPL and then the EPL administrators. With the long-term goals that the sponsor has for this project, the stakeholders could increase to include other students and potentially other schools, but at the moment, our stakeholders are only PSU students and EPL staff.
So our top features for the program were the cloud-hosted application, which we did on on the Google Cloud platform with Cloud Run. We improved the documentation organization of the files to be more easily understood. We did some waiver integration, moving it from sort of Google surveys to a sort of in-house made part of the program that's actually embedded inside of our application. On top of that, we did some flexible training interfaces, which has the ability to train multiple users on multiple machines and actually provides success and failures for each of those instead of the previous implementation, which could only do one user to one machine at a time.
This is Trae. So we needed to be able to containerize our application, and so we needed to make it into a Docker image. In order to start this entire application out, in order to eventually get it to deploy on Cloud Run, which we originally wanted to use AWS, we decided on GCP later on. We needed to containerize it. And what was involved with that was not only setting up a correct environment, making sure that all of the modules that the application needed were included, but also making sure that it ran locally on the Docker image so that we knew it was able to, so that we knew that we had the correct environment for when we eventually went to work on the actual deployment of it. If we look at the next slide real quick, you'll see here that we have the process that went from containerizing it in the bottom right-hand corner here to Cloud Run, which we used to deploy it, to actually giving it a URL link that we were able to access this application from. And so the entire process went from originally just making sure that the application would run on this containered image to debugging it and figuring out what needed to be changed and what needed to be adjusted so that we were able to easily host it on a URL link, and getting into the first step to where this is now able to run on a serverless application, to where eventually multiple instances could hopefully be run from this sort of setup for other, Capstone teams to work on.
Hi, I'm Jacob. I'm going to talk about the documentation and how we restructured the repository. So originally we were left from the last team. The repository was kind of scattered with a bunch of files that were used for automatically generating documentation, and there wasn't really clear instructions of how to use it. So we removed the automatic documentation and we focused on manually documenting the source files so we could leave it in a good spot for the next team. So we moved all of these source files into their own source directory. We're putting the documentation files in their own documentation directory. So you could look at the Git repository and have a clear understanding of how you can go about this repository and understand it better. And we went through the complex functions of each file and gave them good enough comments where we can leave it for the next team so they don't have to spend as much time going through the code base, and they can easily get into the next part of the project. And what we also want to do is give them a good start. So as we talked about earlier, we want to leave them documentation of how to continue setting up the server on the Google Cloud Platform.
Hi, my name is Angel Lores, and I worked in waiver integration. Previously, the waiver was a Google form, which could be easily skipped. So I integrated the waiver and made it part of the new student registration. That way it had to be submitted with the account information. And I added those columns to the user table so that the information would be saved locally. And I added the waiver to the add user form and the admin update user form as well.
Hi, my name is Jesus, and for the training interface, we updated it to have the ability to train multiple students on multiple machines. The format was changed to have it all on one page rather than having to switch between two. Admins and managers can check off machines on the list that they are going to do training on, then add multiple students to the training session using ID numbers, email addresses, or they can scan their IDs. Each success and fail will be displayed when submit is hit, letting you know if each student's training was processed successfully or not. If not, it will provide a reason for the failure for each student.
This is Taylor talking about the additional features. We had a number of additional features that we added to this, including some back buttons and buttons to like close windows properly. Before, there was sort of some weird close window buttons that sort of functioned oddly and were unintuitive. We added a auto logout, which basically, instead of having these windows when people logged in that would just sit there all day, these will over time, they'll just log out for you for when the new people come in and start checking in with their IDs. Of course, we talked about changing the waiver to be integrated. It's signed with sign up, and it's now stored in the database instead of being hosted on Google Forms separately. Users can now have preferred names. If they have a nickname or some other name they want to go by, they can add that into the system, and they'll have both of their normal name and whatever they want to be called. Just a number of improvements for quality of life features for admins, training the multiple students, which we talked about on a machine, or training students on multiple machines at the same time, ability to change passwords, ability to delete machines or edit the machine names, and also be able to delete and edit categories of machines. We added a login search for students by ID or email instead of badge number. This was because badge numbers could potentially change, but the IDs or emails of students is unlikely, if at all possible, to change. So that way it's a little more consistent and a little more data safe. We also improved the general look of the application. There was some, odd window cutoffs depending on displays and whatnot. So we cleaned up some of those so everything is presented in a more concise and clean looking manner. There are also a number of future improvements we think need to be worked on, making the application more dynamic. This ended up being probably the number one reason why the server implementation took so long, because a lot of the program was hard-coded or had static information built in that made it very difficult for things like AWS or for GCP to actually look at and understand what was going on. So there was a lot of having to adjust the program in those ways and get rid of static features of it so that these cloud bases could understand what was going on. Making sure the database works well with the Cloud Run implementation. Currently, the database connects to it and you're able to add into it and whatnot, but there probably could be some cleaning up on that, some testing to make sure certain cases are actually viable. We didn't get a ton of time to actually test the database and make sure it's running smoothly. There's also maybe some cleaning up on the code end that could help make the database just run a little bit better with the Cloud Run itself. In terms of security, adding OAuth 2 for login, which is used on a number of other PSU-based systems. This would just also help in general to verify users and make sure that people are who they say they are, and make sure that we're reducing the potential for any security leaks and whatnot into the program. Of course, FERPA needs to be taken into account. We did not get a ton of time to make sure FERPA could be taken into account, which is why the current database doesn't have any information of the students that is in the local server. Taking FERPA into account, just, there's certain laws and whatnot, and that need to be considered when we're storing, students' information into these databases. So taking those into account, making sure there's good security behind them and whatnot. In terms of being sold as a service, there's a number of things that will need to be done, including, some unique schemas for each new lab. There's going to need to be a web page, right? There's going to need to be a number of systems in place that can get this from one lab that's working for one group to being able to go to other labs and potentially other universities, and also having a page which can handle payments, possibly even subscriptions, and all sorts of different things that on its own seems like its own individual project. This also includes, an interface that can start up an instance that's specific for these different labs or, potentially universities as well. Also having an admin interface that can access top-level implementation in terms of new instances. Currently, the admin works for the one, this one EPL lab. You'd need to create both an admin interface that works for any individual lab, and then you would need an admin that sort of can oversee all of these different, groups, different labs, different universities, et cetera, as well. So there's a number of the improvements that we think will need to be worked on in the future. This is how we achieved our project and our architecture here. We covered our architecture a bit in the last lab, so I won't go over it too much here. Nothing really actually ended up changing on our end in terms of the program's architecture. Most of what we worked on was sort of things that were issues on the code base level, not necessarily in terms of how these files were actually organized at all. Of course, our SQL database has now moved to the cloud, so now it's it's not on this local server. Security, I think, needs to be increased a bit, but most of this stuff hasn't had to change at all. In terms of our flow diagram, same thing, not much has changed here. Of course, we have our admins and we have our students. Our students have a number of actions they can take, which is mostly just logging in and logging out. And then our admins have many things that they're able to do in terms of adding the machines, changing students, whether it's training status or something about, their information, and then, of course, adding students and whatnot as well.
This is Emma again, and I'm going to talk about the development process we went through. So during winter quarter, a lot of what we were doing was research, specifically on the different programming languages that the team before us used, such as Flask and SQLite, and then also researching what platforms would be best to use for the server, and then also just getting comfortable with the code base in general. In addition, we met with our sponsor, Ed. He gave us a live demo and we discussed the main goals he wanted us to achieve during this project, and then also just getting comfortable with the team. So getting comfortable scheduling meetings, finding a time that worked for everyone to meet weekly, and then also doing informal sprints kind of based around the research that I talked about earlier, just to kind of get in that flow. And then during spring quarter, we started more structured 2-week sprints. These were all volunteer based, so everyone volunteered for different implementations and things that needed to be fixed that they were interested in. We used GitHub projects to structure these sprints and assign them to all of our team members. And then we had weekly meetings. Every other week, we were assigning new sprints. And then in between that, we were having check-ins just to make sure everyone was doing okay and that they hadn't run into any major issues. And then
As far as server and cloud stuff, this is Trae, and I did Docker and server implementation over AWS and GCP.
This is Taylor again. I mostly worked on researching about the database and how that would get done. But since we could not implement the database, I ended up shifting over and acting as a support for Trae and his server implementation and help troubleshooting a lot of our dynamic problems that were occurring.
This is Alex, and I worked on polishing and making the login and registration UI more cleaner. I also removed character limitations for student names and implemented a preferred name feature for users who wish to go by another name or nickname. And I also worked on modifying the database to account for the newly integrated waiver, as well as for the preferred names as well.
Hi, I'm Angel, and I worked on the integrated waiver and changing the UI a little bit to accommodate the changes that I made.
Hi, I'm Hieu. I working on a changing the recent user to curate and master recently field display and add close button for start win and confirm the pop-up before the container user.
Hey, this is Jacob again. Previously talked about I worked on a lot of the restructuring of the directories and the documentation. I did some general UI improvements, changing all the manual login to either email or PSU ID rather than the badge numbers. And I removed the student information, student IDs from the Flask routes and the URLs.
Hi, this is Jesus again, and I worked on improving the training interface, added back buttons to the pages, added the ability for admins to be able to change their passwords, also added the auto close for the pop-up windows after an activity, added a close button to the login window, and removed the hard-coded default accounts.
And hi, I'm Tyler. I worked on the automatic timeout for different sessions based on the user's permission. Essentially, we only have 2 levels right now, that being admin and then general user. So just varying the amount of time before a timeout for those 2 cases, and then some other general UI improvements on the application.
This is Taylor again. I'm going to talk about some unexpected events we had. Of course, I've talked about it a few times, but the server integration ended up taking a lot more time than we expected. This was mostly due to the program not being as dynamic as we originally thought, and the sort of troubles that come with trying to get a cloud system that's expecting dynamic code, and instead it's being served static code. So we basically handle this by focusing Trae and myself on the server end and getting that figured out. And then Trae did a wonderful job, of course, of documenting the process so that it's very clear about what needs to be done, the Docker that needs to happen with it, and of course how the server is set up currently and how future teams can go in and build upon what we've already put. In terms of the database, some of the admin logins were like hard coded into it, which when we took those out ended up causing problems when we tried to test it, as we weren't able to actually then get into our program as any sort of admin and look at like if we're able to change or edit or delete machines or train various students and users on different machines and whatnot. So that became an issue, but we worked as a team, problem solved, found a solution by basically just importing an old version of the database just so we could test it, and then of course we're able to remove that when need be. We also use some GitHub doesn't support merge conflicts with the database file, so we found out that we had to sort of manually do that, which was also part of that problem. But together we were able to fix both of these without too much trouble.
This is Emma, and I'm going to go over the customer feedback we got back from Ben. So he said that the new software looks like it fixes most of the issues we had with the previous version of the software. He likes that it maintains the same look and feel in general so that it's easy for them to use. He also likes how several features that they had previously had to manually edit the database are now directly included in the GUI. He says that it would have been nice to have more time to test the final product before the end of the term and incorporate any tweaks from that. But overall, that he's happy with the results and looking forward to installing them on their systems to test further.
This is Emma again, and I'm going to talk about lessons learned. I think the biggest one was just that communication is key. As the project went on, I feel like everyone became more comfortable sharing any problems they were having. And then to kind of go along with that, just having a good team dynamic in general, I felt like was invaluable with this project. We were all motivated towards a common goal, and I think there's also a lot of understanding and flexibility within the team where, people get sick or have other responsibilities or have a lot of work come up for other classes. And when that happens, having other team members willing to step in and help out. And overall, just having great people on the team and this kind of comfortability between everyone was built over time as well. In terms of things that we would do differently if we could do it all over, I think the biggest one is just begin implementing certain features sooner, especially in terms of like the server, just because if we had a little more time, we might have been able to get a little bit more done, but also just generally. And to wrap it up, we all just want to say thank you to Ed for sponsoring this project and for Ben for taking over when Ed had to leave on paternity leave and all of their help throughout this process. And I just want to say thank you to my team for all their outstanding work and dedication. I feel really lucky to have everyone on this team to help.